Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I'm delighted to have Anthony Casa. Anthony is the president and CEO of UMortgage. He's based in Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, which I've been learning all about in history, but we'll talk about that another time. Anthony, it's been an absolute joy talking beforehand, and now welcome to our podcast.
It's great to be here. I've had the great opportunity to listen to a couple of your episodes here, and I'm now a fan and a super fan.
Well, Anthony, thank you. And what a life that you have crammed in already. And the thing I was really touched by was just how inspiring leadership means so much to you. But before we even begin, tell us about the business UMortgage that you've set up and how it helps people. Just tell us a bit about UMortgage.
Yeah, UMortgage is a Philadelphia-based company here in the United States. We're nationwide. Our focus is making the homeownership journey for home buyers better, easier, faster, and cheaper ultimately. And our entire business is engineered to, how do we create more home buyers? How do we lower the burden of home affordability? And really create an experience that hopefully allows us to, generate a lot of customer referrals and raving fans.
Fantastic. Well, I love that one about raving fans. And also on your LinkedIn, I love the fact that you describe yourself as master mistake maker, inoperative filter, and breaker of things. I think that's lovely. But leadership is also something that you're really particularly passionate about. And you and I were talking about leaders setting the tone. What do you mean by leaders setting the tone in your language?
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of if you're the CEO, if you're the leader, it's important to provide structure and systems for your people that you follow and you're accountable to, and that they're expected to do the same on. So, to me, it's all about giving the structure, clearly defining expectations. I think it's the most important thing that you can possibly do, and that's not an event. That's something that you do consistently. And then, creating the mechanisms for, people to, report, to the organization on how we're doing. So I think that's what leadership is really providing the playbook and the structure.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no doubt about it that some have a view that leadership is a choice. You make a decision, I'm going to be a leader, that leadership can be at all levels. But other people have a view that leadership actually, it's a bit like describing yourself as I'm funny. You don't decide whether you're funny or not. Other people decide if you're funny. And it's a bit like being a good team player or a good leader, is that others will decide that you're a good leader and others will decide if you're a good team player. What do you think of that viewpoint?
Yeah, I agree. I think leadership is something you gotta work at, but you can prepare, you can work hard at being a leader, but you gotta want it. And that's the biggest thing is, like, to me, it's like when you look at problems as issues and you look at them as solvable and it's your job to solve them, you're a leader. Like when you wake up and you really embrace that. When I see people that look at problems like, oh, this again, like, well, why can't they figure this out? Like, that's not, to me, it's all about, you understanding yourself and understanding that your role is to help lead people to solve problems or to fix issues. But, it's been a journey for me. And to me, I think the biggest thing about leadership is what I know is great, but what I don't know is limitless. And I'm learning every single day.
Well, I love that approach. And when you and I spoke about the three hums, humility, humanity, and humor. And I think those are very important. And a bit of self-deprecating humor is very important. We also spoke about that you've been lucky to have a great mentor. And I'm often interested in sort of role models and people that that you find inspiring. Who do you want to call out? I think there's a guy called Matt, is there not?
Yeah, Matt Ishbia is the president and CEO of United Wholesale Mortgage. They're the number one lender in the United States. He's been with the company since they were 15 team members, and now they have over 8,000 team members. So, he's built an amazing company, and really what he's been able to show me is a vision for a people ecosystem. And what I mean by that, it's your hiring, it's your recruiting, it's your onboarding, it's your training, and it's your ongoing, and your consistent improvement of those team members. They only hire and train people that have never been in the industry before. So it's very much like, they're not relying on the market to be where they source talent. Like they create their own talent. And for me, that really changed my philosophy on how to build a business and how to scale the business. And he's become the number one lender. He acquired the Phoenix Suns recently. He's a really impressive guy. I would say of all the people I had exposure to, he's somebody that lives it, breathes it, and really sets the example for what leadership looks like.
It's very important, this idea of personal example, and also being open to constantly being a lifelong learner. Before we talk about your own experiences, Alicia, is there anybody else that you want to sort of call out that you found to be an inspiring leader that you want to give them a shout out on the podcast?
I would say I have a a group of leaders here. I'll just call out one of our leaders, Christina Escobar, who's our head of people. She's our vice president of people, and she does an amazing job. She leads by example. She really cares about the results. She cares about the people. She cares about what we're trying to do. So I would give her a huge shout out as just being somebody that is committed to getting better every single day and being the best, becoming the best version of herself.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear that about Christine, because um, sometimes my experience of chief people officer, or what do they call them? Human resources. It's almost like human remains. It sounds so sort of like just like a utility, sort of, we got to use up our resources. What are they? Oh yeah, bring him over. Um, but the really good chief people officer really get, human interaction, emotional intelligence. Yes, they understand the process and the legal aspects, but then there's a body of some who are very good at knowing all the rules and the regulations and the processes, but they somehow don't get the people. They somehow just miss. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but
Oh, I'm going to tell you right now that that's actually one of my biggest learning lessons in business. And it took me a while to figure it out is if they don't get that, well, you can find HR experience and legal and compliance. You can get all that. You can find that anywhere. But if they don't understand human behavior and they don't understand, regardless of how many policies and how many times you train somebody, you always have to, make sure you hold people accountable to do the things you expect of them. And usually when, people are like, oh, it's the team member's fault. It's like, no, no, it's always the leader's fault. It's always the leader's fault. So it's like, what are we not doing? If we hired the right person, what did we not do to lead them to the outcome? So great people leaders, they care a lot and they start with the person. They don't start with the process.
you are so right. And also there's, as well as talking about the chief people officer needs to be good at this, as you were alluding to, I do find sometimes some of the C-suite executives or senior vice presidents, they go, this is a people problem. I'll hand that to HR. You do people stuff. I'm an expert on a technical area or engineering or whatever, but people things, it's you. And as you just said, no. As a leader, anything to do with your people, that's your problem. Now, by all means, bring in the expertise on the rules and regulations and get well programs, and if you have to remove people, but remember at the end, as Truman had on his desk, the buck stops here.
Yes.
Let's talk about your life and growing up and what's shaped you, Anthony, to be the leader you are today as president CEO of UMortgage.
Yeah, I've had multiple lives I lived, I would say, and I dropped out of school when I was 13 years old. My family, my father was had a stroke. We were in the restaurant business, and I was the only person in my family that could go to work full time and support our family while my dad wasn't well at that time. So at 13 years old, I started to run a restaurant, and at first, like the adults that were working there were like, they felt bad for me, but eventually, I really, obsessed over the business. I became obsessed with it, and they eventually gained a respect for me where they didn't look at me as this guy's son. They looked at me as like the leader. So, that experience is what I've had at all these different stops in my life where like, they say the 10,000 hour rule takes like, 10 years to complete, to become an expert at whatever you're doing. And what I have found is that like I do my 10,000 hours usually in like 3.5 years. And it's because I'm just a very obsessive person. I work 100 hours a week. I really, when I'm not working, I'm trying to learn, I'm reading books, I'm trying to figure out what I don't know. And, to me, what I've learned over this process over and over again, I didn't learn it all in one shot. It was like incremental in each stop I've had. But what I've learned is every single time I learned something and I got into the weeds on it, I figured out whoever figured out the process or gave me the blueprint, I figured that they designed something that was never updated. They set it and forget it. And then as I got into the weeds with it, I started to find better ways to do it. And then eventually, as I got more and more mature, it wasn't about incremental improvement. It was really going into everything and realizing like you got to reinvent the whole thing. Like who decides, who makes these decisions? Like some HR leader said at some point you only hire people with a college education. Then when I was CEO, it's like I don't have a high school education. Who the hell are they to tell me that I can't hire somebody without a college education? Like that's just somebody, one person made a decision. So, what has shaped me is understanding that, you don't have to live by anybody else's decision making. And at the end of the day, like you're responsible for whatever you put into the world. So if your client experience, your team member experience, your leadership, it's like if it's not going right, it's up to you to tear it down and rebuild it. And that's really been who I am. I'm a very humble person. And I take my humility from the fact that, working those years in the restaurant, I learned everything I needed to learn about business, which is it's in the doing that you figure everything out.
It is interesting you talk about the restaurant business. I had Horst Schulze, who was again like you, quite an obsessive individual, German, Austrian, I think, and he set up the Ritz-Carlton chain of hotels, and he's written a book called Excellence Wins. I think you'd enjoy it. And I had him as a guest on the podcast. Have a listen to Horst
I
Schulze.
will.
And he now I think is in America advising hotels and things like this. But and then he went on and set up another chain of hotels, where it was just all about excellence and this concept, ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, which was just such a lovely saying. This idea of making sure that the staff behaved and dressed well and treated the customers well, and also just fascinating when I remember him talking about that, as you were describing, looking at the processes and the attention to detail. It seemed very similar to Horst in that in one of his Ritz-Carlton hotels, it was going really well. It was early days. It just set it up. He had to keep setting up different ones as it grew and expanded. But people were not happy with the in-room service of breakfast. It would arrive cold. And he was, berating the kitchens. Come on, you got to get the food. Yeah, the food was warm when it left, and it was on the trays. It was warm, and then he and two others went and followed the trail. Literally took one of the breakfasts, and they found that when they got in to the lift, they couldn't get into the lift because the lift was held at different floors. They could see it stopping from being for a long time. It was stopped at a floor. And they were going, what's going on? So they walked up the stairs to that floor, and they found a guy had wedged the door open, one of the chaps who was doing the laundry. And he said, what are you doing? Oh, he said, well, I'm borrowing some of the sheets from this floor for my floor below because we're short of sheets. And then he looked into it. He went, what's this issue? Why are they borrowing sheets from each other's floors? And he said, well, sir, actually, you as the hotel manager, when we decided to have 3 sets of laundry or 2, you went, 3 sets? That's too expensive. Let's just have 2 sets. And we have 2 sets. That means there's one in the wash and one on the beds. And so we're short of a set. So they keep robbing from each other. And this is why they wedge the doors open to go up, take the sheets from the other one, and then they're robbing from each other. And in the meantime, the guys can't get in the lift to get the breakfast to the people. Ah. And so he said, I'll buy another set of laundry. Problem solved. But you didn't know the cause of the problem, and you could just say, sort it out. But actually, somebody needs to work it out. I don't know. Does that story resonate with you?
Oh my goodness, that's such a great story. And to be honest with you, like downstream and upstream impact is one of the things I learned in the restaurant business more than anything. And it's actually one of the hardest things that as we've scaled our business, I've had to really make sure our leaders understand is you make decisions in a vacuum and then you don't understand the unintended consequences downstream or upstream. It's such a big deal. I'm going to give you one example, one story that really I think touches home and speaks to kind of what some of your people that have been on this podcast have said is, when I was in the restaurant business, one of the things I learned is I had certain people and team members that, I knew that if on certain nights they would leave work and they go out and they go to the bar and they drink and they might not show up the next day, or they would show up the next day and be 50% less productive. And I was only a teenager at the time, but one of the things I figured out was like, man, after work, I just got to hang out with these guys, because on the nights that I hang out with them till, let's say the restaurant closed at 9 o'clock, I would hang out with them till 11 o'clock and watch TV at the restaurant. They would go home and go to sleep, and then they would be fresh the next day. But the days that we just left and we called it a day and they went to the bar, they would come in, they would either not show up or not be productive. Sounds small, but why that matters is because if you as a leader think that your only job is to lead your people from 9 to 5 or whatever your hours of work are, and you think that everything that happens outside of your walls is not important, you're completely mistaken. The things that are going on outside of the walls are just as important. You got to know what's going on with your people's families. You got to know what's going on in their personal lives. You got to know what's going on with their travel issues or anything at all. Because at the end of the day, somebody's effectiveness is going to be only as good as their ability to focus on what they're doing. And if they have issues with their kid, if they have issues with their spouse, if they have any of these things going on, believe me when I tell you, you're not going to get the results that you're expecting. So, I've always correlated that as one of the biggest things is when something's off, I always start with the person. Again, I don't focus on what's going on inside the business.
Make me smile because you remind me of being a young officer in the British Army. And when we were based in Germany, you have to be aware of what's happening in the lives of some of your soldiers. And I remember going with one of my sergeants to visit one of the soldiers who was having trouble, and we weren't quite sure what it was. And it was a rather sad story because we got to the door and he had blood on his nose. He'd obviously been punched in the nose, and his wife was at the back and she was angry. And he was wiping the blood on his daughter's hair, and she was only like about 4. And you just thought, no, this is wrong. There's something really going. And it turns out that he and actually his wife had both been abused as they were growing up. Now they were abusing their own child. We had to get some help in there, but you couldn't kind of understand what was really going on until you do that. Of course, now you got to be careful because some people don't want you to be involved in their lives and get out of my life. This is my personal life. But I think caring about people and making sure that they are okay and spotting when something is amiss, and you say to someone, how are you doing? I'm fine. And they go, I'm not really hearing that you're fine. Come on, let's go for a walk. What's really going on? And then out it all comes. I think it's, as you say, a real skill in that. It's interesting that you talked about the intensity that you've had in your life, and that 10,000 hours of purposeful practice. Certainly I know when I got beyond 10,000 hours as a leadership coach to CEOs, the game changed. It wasn't like ding at 10,000 hours suddenly everything was different, but I just found it came more easily. And I'm sure as I'm doing 10,000 hours of podcasting, I'm also finding it's getting much easier, and I'm really enjoying it. And therefore, I think guests like yourself hopefully have more fun. But I think you raise a very good point. Intensity and really getting stuck into things and doing them well and becoming expert, or as Horst Schulze talked about, excellence wins. But it does come with a price. You can achieve an awful lot of things, but there is a price to it, and there are consequences. And you and I have both been divorced, and I'm now remarried. I'm not quite sure of your circumstances, but there's probably some consequences when we are so intense that there's what I call collateral damage to families or spouses or whatever. It's a bit of a personal question, but I mean, any lessons that you've learned from being divorced and how you have to get everything sorted? You can't just be a workaholic.
Yeah, I think I had to go through what I've gone through to know what I know now. Like everybody says to you, you're gonna, when your kids, they grow up so fast, and all these things are true, but until you lived it, it's a perspective that you really can't, fully take on. So I think for me, I started my family, I got married, had kids super young, and I think, what I've learned about myself is I've learned going through this process is I really enjoy the work, and I really enjoy, what gives me a lot of purpose is doing big things and building things and developing, something of value. the for a while I had this shame that, while I was married, my ex-wife, who I have a great relationship with, and she's an amazing mom, an amazing woman. But one of the things that would happen is I would find myself, we would be on the beach and I couldn't relax. I would want to go back to the house. And it wasn't that I always went to work, and it wasn't that I was doing work. It's sometimes it was just thinking about work. It wasn't thinking about stressful things. I was thinking about getting better. I was thinking about things that I wanted to, processes I want to change or whatever. And I used to shame myself. I was like, why, you got to focus on this. You got to be where you're at. And over time, I really had this reconciliation of like, I figured myself out, and I know exactly who I am. I know exactly where I want to be, and I know exactly who I want to spend my time with. I didn't when I was 19 years old and I got in my initial relationship and started having kids and doing all that stuff. I didn't know who I was. I was a young kid, and it's just like with you in hour one of 10,000 hours. You didn't know who you were as a coach when you were doing this podcast, but 10,000 hours later, man, like you've mastered, you got a process, you've got a great client experience, like you've done something amazing. So to me, it's like, I would say for everybody is going back to this whole thing about living and figuring out. It's like, you might get it right the first time and be the best husband the first time and the best father. God bless you. And hopefully, and you must have great parents and great people around you to support that. Most people never figure things out the first time. Sometimes it takes the second time. But I know that for me, whenever I do get married again, or I get in a relationship again, I have learned so much about myself that I will be better prepared to be the best husband, spouse at that time. So that's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, no, I think those are wise words. And in our lives, we have, as you say, good points and tough times. You learn a lot from both, but I think it's always an awkward question to ask people. But what, Anthony, did you learn from darkest part of your life? And would you be prepared to share that with us to listen to your lesson?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when my dad passed away, that was the biggest change, the biggest darkest moment in my life. And I'll just give you a very quick story, but every single day from the time I got, became in the 18 years old, I became a salesperson in the mortgage industry. Every single day, my dad would call me and, ask me to stop over at his house on the way home or way to work. And every day I was like, Dad, I'm too busy. I'll stop over this weekend. I'll stop over next week. Every day my response was tomorrow, the next day. It was always kicking the tire down the road. That went on for 10 years. And then, when he ultimately got sick and passed away, I had all this time to reflect, and I would be like, man, why didn't I have time to spend time with my dad over this period of time? And the realization I had was at the end of the day, you got to live the life you want to live. And, for my dad and, really for myself for a period of time, is I wasn't living that life. I didn't have a job, that I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing in my work. I wasn't doing it in my relationships. And, I had to start over. And that's when I sold my first company. I got divorced all in 24 months. My dad passed away. I had all these realizations, and I really started to change my life. And I would just put it out there for everybody. It's like, at the end of the day, it's okay to start over. I think people think of things like that. There's this negativity around, having a midlife crisis. For me, the realizations I had at 34, I'm just happy I didn't have them at 54. I'm really happy, and I'm really grateful that I was able to learn about myself at a point where I could have an intervention.
Yeah, and look, I'm sorry for what you went through. And when somebody dies, it really is such a shock. And it is often a watershed. And time and again, other leaders, you're not the first, have said, I was just so busy carving out my career, getting to know the kids, going through a difficult time, whatever it was, that I always thought there was going to be tomorrow, that I was invincible, and so were they. They were always going to be around. But then one day they weren't. And I wasn't ready for that. I hadn't spent the time with them. And this idea of just remember that, every day is a gift. I mean, my dad was 33 when he was killed. I would
Wow.
do anything, Anthony, anything to be given some days to talk with my dad. And they often talk about it being your father's blessing. When you can get from your father, Anthony, I'm proud of you. You've done amazingly well. You took over from me when I had the stroke, and you running the restaurant, and you've got stuck into mortgaging as working for a mortgage business at 18. And, I'm proud of you. Never obviously had that kind of conversation, didn't have that chat with my father. My grandfather was also killed, and my uncle, all killed flying. It's a bit of a dangerous time when you're a fast jet pilot. But what was very interesting on one of the development programs I did called the Mankind Project, I can't even go to the details of it, but it was very smartly organized in such a way that there was almost a replaying of me being able to have a conversation with my father. It
Wow.
was just so well done with actors and people around me. And I had this incredible, very moving, very tearful conversation with my father. He told me how proud he was of me and what I went through. And even though I'd, made mistakes and got divorced and things like that and had some tough times, but of all the things I'd achieved and the work I was doing to help other people and the charity my wife and I have set up for the victims of violence against women and girls. And being able to have that blessing from my father and have that conversation with him was such a liberation. It was literally only about 2 months ago, but uh,
Wow.
I am a different person as a result of that. And I think there's quite a lot of unblocking that we need to do, and maybe some masks that we wear as we're growing up as leaders. And that process allowed me just to peel back another couple of those masks. Um, the next thing I was interested in with you, Anthony, is you're learning so much, you're hungry to learn. If you went back and met Anthony, age 16 to 18, in your DeLorean, you said, this matters, this doesn't matter, what would you say?
I would 100% this, and I've thought about this so much over the last 5-6 years. Is I would say think bigger, and I would just tell you is I have always been a very competitive person, and I mean this in no like whatever way, but I've always competed and become number one at whatever I did. Number one salesperson, mortgage first company was the number one broker in the country, and that's for a while I was always chasing that. The problem, the realization I had, because I eventually had this moment of like kind of a little bit of a mental bankruptcy moment that I had, was that when you're chasing number one, you're chasing somebody else. And what I realized at a certain point was, man, like you got to have your own vision. Like you're letting somebody else who, based upon what they're doing and what they achieve, to be what you're running after. And at a certain point, you got to have your own vision, run towards something that you want. Because once you get to number one, what are you going to stop? And I think of I started a technology company in 2018 called ARIVE, and I think about that a lot because when we started that company, it wasn't about becoming better than the other companies out there. My whole thing was the company that the technology didn't exist that we wanted to build. So we had to have a vision, and then we eventually built it in this technology we use today. And that's what I approach, not only UMortgage with, but I approach everything in life at this point. It's like, I don't care about what everybody else is doing. I'm rooting for everybody else. I'm focused on my vision. And every single day I've got to sit there and say, am I getting closer? Am I getting better? Am I striving towards that? So if I was looking at 18-year-old Anthony, I would just say, dude, it's not about everybody else. It's not about who's number one. It's not about the, keeping up with the Joneses. It's about you. And you got to have a vision for your life.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting one. If you worry what other people think about you, be surprised how little they do. They're just thinking about themselves. They're focused on their own
Yes.
area. And this idea of having a clear vision and a life plan is really important. Episode 200, have a listen to General the Lord Danner, my old commanding officer, who ends up in the House of Lords and was head of the army. And I knew him when he was a commanding officer, lieutenant colonel, quite junior in the army rankings. But we always sort of knew he was quite special, and he had some great wisdom. We were sitting in a wet wood waiting for the Chinook helicopters to come in and pick us up in one of our air mobile roles. And he said to me, Jonathan, what's your life plan? I said, what do you mean, Colonel, life plan? He said, what's your life plan? I said, well, I don't have a life plan. He said, you really do need a life plan. He says, because if you don't have a life plan, you'll end up in somebody else's plan. And he said, guess what they've got planned for you? And I went, I don't know. And he held his hands up, little finger and the thumb, and there's a small gap of about an inch between them. And he went, not very much. They haven't got much planned for you. It's just what you can do for them in their life plan. So you carving out a plan, which is very different from what others have, and you may be, the lone nut, the one who's doing something different from the rest of them. But the fact is, you know what you're doing and you're clear about it. And of course, your job is to be very clear about the purpose, the intent of what you're doing. And while you can't control certainty for everybody, because everything's changing so much, who was to know what, things would be happening the way they are some years ago, the Russians invading Ukraine and, war in the Middle East and things like that. We never saw some of those things coming. We knew there was problems, but when would it erupt? You can't control the certainty, but you can create very clear clarity about what you're about, your mission, and things like that. I love that. So let's go on to the Inspiring Leadership Compass. We'll go for a trip around the compass, if we would, Anthony. MQ is moral quotient, values, principles, what you'll stand for, what you won't fall for, and your integrity. And what comes up for you when you think about integrity and maybe letting things slip or something didn't kind of work out the way you'd want to, according to your values?
Yeah, I have a set of values that were my personal values that became our company values here. And I really live by them. And it's such a big part of everything that I do as a person. And it's very much what I've seen of you as well, is very, just being intentional with clarifying your values. I've had a couple instances in my businesses where we were at the brink. We hit some bad points, and my previous technology company, even at this company, we started this company in the middle of a pandemic, and then a housing recession started, and we had some unexpected things happen that we were really, in a bad place. And at those moments, you learn a lot about yourself. I learned so much about myself at this most recent time where I got a call from my CFO, and I don't want to get into all the details, but essentially, a series of events led to us being $1 million short in cash on the day of payroll. And you're talking about $1 million with 5 hours till a deadline, and it's like, CFO knows like all of our means. It's not like, hey, transfer money from here. It's like, no, we know everything that exists. We're $1 million short, and there's nothing we can do. And when you're in that moment, you really learn a lot. Honestly, you learn what you're made of. And to me, some people at that point, they call their bankruptcy attorney, and they do the thing that is the most attainable. For me, what I learned about myself in that moment was like, I was determined to not go out of business on that day. I was determined. I called team members. I called people to borrow money. Oh, hey, $10,000. Like, I have $1 million, and I got to where I need to get to. And we resolved that issue very quickly. But when you're there, you have zero options. It tells you a lot. It really tells you how much you care. How much does this mean to you? Do you have a plan B? Do you start thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow if it doesn't work out? Or do you just focus on making sure that you get to where you need to be in 5 hours? So, for me, that was a big learning lesson. There's a lot of reflection I did after. You talked about downstream impact, what got us there. But in that moment, it really was a big learning lesson for me.
Yeah, and you remind me of the Navy SEAL motto, or really a sort of approach. Something goes badly wrong. Often, unfortunately, it's with people getting killed, and they go, "Great," not meaning that's good, but great. Now what? Now what? What's your learning? What's your action? What are you going to do? Take massive action and do something about it. Moving on to the next one around the compass is MQ, so PQ, purpose, meaning and purpose question. And what gives your life meaning and purpose? So I do find the most inspiring leaders have a clear vision of what gives their work and their life meaning and purpose. Share what it does for you.
Yeah, I think I'm really self-aware. So like to me, my purpose is I want to become the best version of myself. And I feel like I am very far away from that. And I come into every single day, and you said it when you were talking about your relationship with your father, and just say every day is a gift. Like to me, it's like I come in every single day. It's like I'm either going to get a day closer, or I'm going to go 2 days backwards, because if I lose a day, then I've gone backwards. And I really obsess over how I can get better. Like, to me, coming in this podcast, I was like, how can I make sure that I leave this podcast and Jonathan thinks, like, when he recommends one of his episodes, he's telling people, hey, you gotta watch episode 248, or whatever that number is, because we did such an amazing job. So my purpose is, I want to get better, but I want to get better because I want to help everybody around me get better. And I know that sometimes, like, you got to be that light for people to show them that, they're in a rut, that it's a day-to-day thing. And I don't let days compound. Like to me, it's like, if I have if a couple bad days, I'm not doing what I need to be doing. I really focus on taking one day at a time and being super present everywhere I'm at.
It's a lovely approach. And episode 336, I think it is.
All right.
You're rolling in it. And this idea of getting better every day, I do like this. And I think it's this sense of living a life that has meaning and purpose. When you go back and you fall back onto living a life on purpose rather than off purpose. Today, I committed, and I've got myself a Michael Heppel, who's going to be my book coach, and we're doing some work on AI. I am writing my next book, and it's going to be
Exciting.
CEOs and teams, inspiring leaders. And it's about the people on the podcast, but also my own life journey, where this is intertwined with the 8 principles of the compass, but some really cracking quotes and practical things. As you and I talked about, we want the practical examples. What can I do? What have others done that might work for me? At the same time, so that's just really my commitment here on air. I am writing the book. I've been thinking about it for a couple of years, but actually a whole series of events brought me back to living my life on purpose. And a health scare where I wasn't sure how long I have to live. I thought, I want to write for my 3 grandchildren, there's more coming, and my 4 children, a book that they're proud of, which their dad wrote, and that it helps the lives of CEOs and teams around the world, but also the lives of people I will never meet. And as my book coach, Michael Heppel said, it's not the books you read that change your life. It's the book you write that changes your life. And that
Awesome.
really, really got me. And I thought, I'm going to write that book. So,
wow, I got to say, that's inspiring. Like, hearing you say it the way that you just said it, like, that motivates me big time.
yeah. Well, we're going to work one day on you writing your book. So I'll do the deal. I'll get mine written in the next 8 months. I will write that book. Now, in all the busyness that you and I have, and all the other leaders who are listening in 135 countries around the world, health and well-being, mental health, brain health, as we call it, physical health is very important, so that we can live as long a possible life as we can in a healthy way. We talked about upstream and downstream. I think it reminds me of all the damage that some of the big food companies are doing to our health, so that 92.5% of Americans, and not many different in the UK, are metabolically unhealthy. And that is because of the food that we put into our bodies. And then big pharma come downstream and they go, and we'll give you this pill, which will keep you living for a few weeks longer. But it won't stop the fact that you've eaten all this junk food. Just my little hobby horse, as you can tell. I feel very strongly about healthy living and healthy food. What is your tip on what you do to keep healthy, Anthony? Because you're a busy man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about root cause. So I would tell you, is all health in my world is mental health. At the end of the day, the physical health, everything you want to do starts with your mind. And you got to train your mind, just like you got to train your body by working out and going on the treadmill and doing all these things. You got to train your mind. You got to train your mind to eat right. You got to train your mind to wake up on time. You got to train your mind. You got to self-talk positive things, so you have positive thoughts and you do positive stuff. And that's where I really spend a lot of time, because I've gone through dark times of my life, and I've really got in ruts at certain points of my life. So I've prioritized my mental health in a big way, and it all starts with the processes I have. Even when it comes to sleep, I struggle with sleep. It's something that I'm just like a high energy person. And what I've learned is I had to have a pre-sleep process, things that would get me, wired up and going, that would prevent me from sleeping. I had to take those things out of the equation. So whether, it's my physical health, whether it's my nutrition, whether it's my mental health, it's all about process and being very intentional. It's so important. And the only way to be successful in your work is to be optimally in the right mental space and physical space to be able to be, successful.
Yeah. Such good approach and an attitude. It does begin, your thoughts create your worlds, and the way you approach things. And I've really, like you, worked hard on getting good sleep. I've just actually, the decorators just left the house because we're having some really good blackout curtains in our bedroom, because if
Nice.
if the room isn't dark and I've got an air conditioner in there, and if it isn't cool, you will not sleep well, and you'll then wake up. Having a good night's sleep. The book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, is a cracking book on this topic if you ever want a good one. Why We Sleep. And if you have a good night's sleep, and an extra hour sleep compared to what you had the night before, you'd be 30% more productive. Now, I don't know about you, Anthony, but I don't know of anything else that can affect my productivity like good or bad sleep. And so yeah, let's keep working on that one. moving on
Absolutely.
moving on to emotional and social intelligence. This is, as they call it, street smarts, but your ability to read and manage your own emotions, read and manage mine and other people that you meet, and read the environment, what's really going on in the organization, the world around you. How do you listen well to other people, Anthony? What's your tip?
Yeah, I've had an evolution here, and like I'm a very like I'm such a different person than I was a couple of years ago, because I've really had to become a better listener. And really, you have to work on it. But the way I correlate is like, I focus to listening to the words, and it's like listening to a song and focusing on the lyrics, not the instruments. To me, it's like tone and delivery can get in the way of the actual message. It can create an emotional reaction. So, if your tone is a certain way, you might sit there and be like, oh, well, they really are passionate about this. So maybe maybe it might inform your view of a topic. But what I've learned is you just got to like listen to the words. Don't let the tone, don't let, what somebody, the passion, don't let the energy, be it. Just what are the words that they are choosing? And then ask specific clarifying questions, and follow before you have a response or a directive. I think it's important to be very present, be very thoughtful, ask questions, and most importantly, it's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to be in a situation where you can discuss problems and not have a solution. It's okay. That's an okay thing. So it's a lot of work, and that's my approach.
Yeah, so many things come from that. Certainly that the skill of listen, and it is a skill, and it's got to come from an intent that you're not trying to show how smart you are, but you're genuinely interested in the other. What is their viewpoint? What do they think? And we think often like, it's like, goodness, you're in the business of selling. Actually, it's not about selling. It's actually about the other buying you and what you have to offer, rather than you pushing onto them or speaking more. And I think people get this idea, you do, debating perhaps at university or whatever, or you're taught how to do the public speaking, but do they teach you how to do public listening? No. And where is the training and the development so that you and I discuss things and I go, maybe we're having a disagreement, Anthony, and I go, Anthony, how about this as a deal? You go first. I want to listen to you and your side of this discussion, and let me play to your satisfaction, summarize very briefly your point of view. And if you feel I've heard you, would you then listen to my point of view and summarize my point of view to my satisfaction? Who wouldn't say yes? I mean, it's just pretty reasonable, isn't it? And I found time and again that really solves it, that you're not only listening, but you're listening so well that you can summarize. Don't need to take notes. You're clever. You can remember. If you got, certainly when you're as bald as I am, although not bald, but the top of my head shows, if I'm leaning forward, taking notes like an FBI investigator, you'll see the wrong side of me. But I don't need to take notes. I just need to listen really well, maybe one word or two, and play back to you what I understand to be your point of view. And I find even as a leadership coach with the CEOs I coach, the bit they like the most is having the first 20 minutes of a strategic time to think session where I listen to them without interruption, having just asked them, what do you want to think about and what are your thoughts? And then I will not interrupt you until you pause and you say to me, Jonathan, ask me another question. If you're quiet or you're making notes, that's fine. You're thinking, and I won't assault your thinking. So just remember that term. Don't assault somebody else's thinking. Listen to them well, and then check that you've heard what they have to say. Next one is CQ, collaborative, cognitive, and cultural intelligence. Differences, diversity, equality, inclusion. We have a problem in this world of ours at the moment where there's so much polarization. You look in our country with some of the disastrous politicians we've had, and in your country in America where there's so much vitriol and differences between Republican and Democrat. But how do you get on with people who are very different from you, Anthony? What's your tip to people listening?
My tip is twofold, and there's a theme here that we've talked about in this conversation. I think they're both really relevant. It's probably the most important thing for if you're going to be a successful leader. I think number one is you have to have a self-awareness to yourself, and you have to communicate expectations on how you communicate and how you like to be communicated to. I have all different leaders and I communicate in a very specific way. I send voice memos to my leaders with feedback at all different times. And I have people that are, people that like to write emails. I have people that like, they like to have meetings, and people communicate very differently. And if you take a one size all approach to it, what you're going to find is the outcomes are not going to match, your inputs. Like you're not going to see people hearing, what you want to say. And I always tell people, it's like, you got to say something 7 times for the people to hear it 1 time. Unless you effectively learn how to communicate with each individual. But you got to care enough to do that. And that's something you said earlier. You made a comment about, some people don't like to talk about their personal life and work. It's like, as a leader, you are selling something, okay? You're selling leadership. And in order to sell that effectively, you have to build trust. And in order for you to build trust, you have to build a relationship. And in order for you to have that, talking about the things outside the walls of work is organic if you're successful at building trust. So to me, it's like, I focus on this is like when the politics and the issues and all these things that divide us are not talked about, and we're just talking about our values, my values of relationships, not transactions, experience is everything, own the moment, get better every day, create strong communities. When I talk about those things, people are like, man, we are aligned. Like we care about the same thing. And I always tell people, it's like, well, let's keep it that way. Let's not talk about political views. Let's not talk about sports views. Let's not talk about those things, because guess what? You might like this football team and I might like this team, and that might change the way you look at me, but our values are the same. So I think you got to be intentional. And I think it's harder than ever before because of social media, because of the media, there's so much noise out there. There's so much noise.
Yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on with that one. And understanding others' points of view, or where you, I think the point I'm picking up from you is really, where do we have commonality? Where are we most alike? What have we got in common, rather than how are we polarized and post-truth and populism? Resilience is the next one around the campus, RQ. And Hugh has already told us about, you have had your fair share of needing a lot of resilience to cope with adversity. But how have you picked yourself up in times of adversity?
Yeah, I think when I was in those times, like this is going back like earlier in my career and earlier in my life, I think like adversity would be a very like I would struggle with it big time. I would hit these breaking points and I would really be like, oh my God, the world, I'm so unlucky and blah blah blah. What I've learned is adversity isn't an event, it's an outcome, and it really comes down to our processes. And you talked about health. It's like if somebody has a heart attack, that's not an event. That was the byproduct of 30 years of eating bad stuff, or not eating, doing what you need to do. So, what I've really evaluated is when things go bad or I don't get the outcomes that I want in my personal life or in my business life, I really think about like, how did I get here? What were the things that led me to here? And I always look inward. I always think about what I could have done differently, how I can adjust things. And I think, for me, I really, in our business, I always ask people like, what's your process? And at the end of the day, that's what really decides what your outcomes are going to be.
Yeah. I love that one. What's your process? And then on to brand, BQ. Um, Brand, reputation, image, and impact. It's not what you think about yourself. It's what people say about you, Anthony, when you're not in the room. What have you what have you learned from 360 feedback? How often do you use in your organizations 360 feedback? Do you get an independent person to do the feedback for you personally, or do you use a sort of an agency that does engagement surveys? I don't know. Just tell me more.
We have a leadership, we have an internal leadership coach that works with our executives. And, we basically have a process where they identify, 6 to 8 stakeholders that are either their peers, direct reports, or work on a consistent basis with them to, intake that information, take the, survey them, gather information, and be their feedback coach or accountability partner over the course of a 6-month period. So we have a process there. I think, the brand that I feel that I have is that I really expect us to get a lot better, and I expect us to be obsessed with getting better. I think for a lot of people that have struggled with me over the course of this business, and leaders that have not been able to sustain, it's because they think improvement is an event. They think like, oh, I got that feedback, and then 6 months later, we're good. And like, then it's like, well, now here's the new feedback. Here's all the new things we're going to get better at. And I don't think a lot of people like that. I don't think that's normal. I think for me, I'm one of those people that I always think we're in some phase of development. So I think my brand is I'm relentlessly in pursuit of my own improvement and the improvement of the people around us. And it's good in some cases, and it's also bad.
Yeah, it's what we describe as work in progress. I am work in progress, always will be. And I'm a big Stoic fan. I love reading stuff about Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. I'm listening to one on Seneca on death, having a good life and a good death. About 2.5 hours of this. Sounds a bit morbid, but it's not at all. And Marcus Aurelius was spotted about a year before he died, and he was on his way with a tablet in those days, and almost like his MacBook or something, going to a lesson with a tutor. And he said, what are you doing? Why are you studying at your age? He said, you're never finished learning. It's a lifetime journey. And I love that. Um, Talking of lifetimes, legacy, what would like your legacy to be when you come to that final moment and you're sitting there in your coffin and you're thinking the email box is still full. My inbox, I've got emails I must answer, but what would you like your legacy to be?
I really truly mean this. For whatever person is in at my funeral, and I've thought a lot about this, is I want to be the best whatever I was to them in their life. I want to be the best leader that they interacted with. I want to be the best example, the role model. I really do care about the relationship piece. I don't, to me, it matters. It matters to strive to be the best. I really feel my goal is to be the best CEO of a mortgage company in the world. Like that's my goal. And if I'm not striving to do that every day, then what am I doing here? So, I would love to be in a position where I either am the best or at least I aspire to other people to, to achieve the best.
Yeah. And when you are the best, or certainly you're on the way to being the best, you've got to turn around a lot of teams. Some teams are really great and they're cooking on gas, as we used to say, cooking on gas. Others are toxic and they're infighting, they're falling apart with each other. What's your practical tip of turning around a toxic team?
Yeah, it really, this was your first question. I think this is an important one. Just like first you got to define your system and your process. And, we say it here, leaders set the tone. So, what does that mean? It means that, when somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, it shouldn't require HR to get involved. People show up 5 minutes late to a meeting. It's like, the minute that happens, it doesn't require the leader to sit there and be like, hey, we got to talk. One of their peers need to be sitting there saying, hey, excuse me, we show up on time here. This is what we do. It shouldn't require process and HR and all that stuff to happen. So to me, when I think about like turning around a toxic team, it's clearly communicating our values. it's clearly communicating expectations, and then it's accountability and feedback. And you got to be rigid with it. We, like I in our organization, if there's one thing people would describe, they would say this organization lives off of feedback. So if you're not used to hearing how you could get better, you are going to struggle at UMortgage. So, there's 3 steps of the process. If they exceed expectations, recognize them. Recognize and give examples of what you're recognizing. Oh, not Jim did a good job. Why? What behavior? Okay. If they're, meeting expectations, but not exceeding expectations, coach them up and develop them. If they're not meeting expectations, they got to go. If they're not responding to the coaching, they got to go. But that would be my thing is, the only way to turn around toxic teams is to have alignment in culture, clear expectations, and no tolerance for any bad behavior.
That is really good, Anthony. And I think, again, with many of your processes, that clarity of the stages you're going to go through gives everybody a chance. But at the end, as Reed Hastings said in his book, No Rules Rules, the keeper test that you've got to use to all the people you have in your own team is 2 questions. Question 1 is, knowing what I know about Anthony, would I hire him again to be the CEO and president? Question 2 is, if Anthony said to me, Jonathan, I'm moving on, I'm thinking of going to this other job, would I be going, oh no, that's terrible, I can't lose him, he's essential? Or would I be going, oh, thank goodness for that, I'm so relieved he's going? Because those 2 will tell you whether you should be working on them or you should be helping them find their happiness elsewhere. Last question, then we're going to the 2-minute top tip, and we're perfectly on time. So thank you, Anthony. A favorite book on leadership and why you recommend people read it?
I think it's a combination of leadership and thought process, but Principles by Ray Dalio is a book that I've read at least 2 dozen times. I send it to every new leader that joins our organization, and the why behind it is it's understanding, like, he provides a clear structure and framework for decision making. And what I have found is that it really, you talked about unblocking doors, like that book unblocked doors for me, because I understand that we would make decisions in our business that we would keep having the same issues come up, and we'd go back and make a decision again. We weren't systematizing those decisions. And I think in his book, he really identifies that when you make a decision, it's creating a system so that going forward, anytime that, a situation poses itself, like, you have a framework for how you make that decision. And it's not, this leader has their view, this leader has their view. It's like, as a company, this is our decision-making process.
I do like that. And I think somebody else, a decision-making process with a clear criteria and framework for it is incredibly helpful. But also somebody described it as 2-way door decisions or 1-way door decision. A 2-way door decision is you need to get on and make a decision, use the process, make the decision. But actually, if circumstances change, you can actually revisit it again. And you, as the CEO president, have to be into evaluation of decisions. Decision makings need to be as low a possible level process that goes on. Make them as early as they can so that they're not always upward delegating to you. But the 1-way decision is, we're making this one and there's no way back. It's like, we're committed to it. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You're either all in or you're not. You've got to be fully to that one. So I quite like that 2-way, 1-way door decisions. So Anthony, would you kindly introduce yourself, tell us what you do now, and share with us a practical top tip?
My name is Anthony Casa. I'm the president and CEO of UMortgage. We're one of the fastest growing mortgage companies in America, and we're focused on becoming the best mortgage company in America. My pro tip would be, be a champion. To me, I look at it as, be a champion means in every single thing that you do, you approach it to be the best at what you're doing. And like, this podcast, to me, I prepared for it. I made sure I watched, previous podcasts. I made sure I learned about you, Jonathan, and your background and what you put out in the world. And I take this approach to everything. To me, it's like, if I have a meeting, I'm not just going to the meeting and showing up. I'm looking at the agenda. I'm looking at who's in the meeting. I'm getting an understanding. I'm asking questions to make sure I understand the context and the nuance and what my role is and what decisions need to be made. And that goes for everything. Be a champion in every single thing you do. And by the way, that means you're going to prepare a lot more. What do champions do? They prepare, right? Like the Olympics, we just had that. they spend 3.5 years preparing for a month, you know? So to me, it's like, you got to prepare, and that's a reallocation of time. But my pro tip is, you know, it starts with you and being a champion in everything you do on your current agenda every day.
Fantastic advice, Anthony. Thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's been a true honor having you as our guest.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to continuing on with our relationship.
Thank you, Anthony. Bye for now.